Hello, and welcome to the Pragmatic Product Chat series, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management, product marketing, and other market and data-driven professionals with some of the best minds in the industry. I'm Rebecca Caligeris for Pragmatic Institute and your host for this episode. Today, I'm very excited to have back on the show a training, facilitator, and coach of high-performing teams, founder of Collaborate Solutions, Jenny Martin, aka Jenny with the Blocks. Hey, Jenny.
Thanks. That's a lovely introduction. Thanks for having me.
We had you on a couple years ago. It was a great conversation. I also just think you bring a great energy to our conversations and to the work you do. So I'm very, very excited to dig in. For those who don't remember from last time, tell us a little bit about your origin story, right? How did you get where you are? Why are you so passionate about what it is that you do?
Right. Okay. So back 30 years ago, I did a degree in psychology. And then after that, just landed myself in a tech company as a tester. And sort of 25 years later, I was still leading software development teams, and I'd done loads of training and, lived through all of the rollout of Agile, old enough to remember all of the old practices of Water-Scrum-Fall and all the pains that came with both of those things. But I guess it took me quite a long time to figure out that the thing that was really motivating me wasn't so much the practices themselves, but that feeling that you get when everyone's collaborating really well and flourishing, and the team are doing awesome things, they're feeling good, they're getting work done, they're happy and motivated. And so I left that job, set up my own company, focusing on training around the really collaborative practices in software development. And then since then, I've been doing more and more work, sort of putting out my feelers back towards my psychology origins. So more work around high-performing teams, more work around psychological safety, about inclusivity. So I do EDI training now as well. Last year, I launched a conference about inclusive facilitation. So I'm a facilitator. So I really want to, I'm motivated when everybody from a team is contributing to their fullest. You get that synergy of diverse brains and backgrounds, and awesome things happen. So I guess that's why the last, 5 or 6 years, I've been going by the name of the collaboration coach as well. Jenny with the Blocks is to do with my Lego Serious Play certification. So I find that just an awesome technique to roll into most of the things that I do. Just unlocks loads of insights and helps teams think and collaborate. And then last year, I did a postgrad in the psychology of kindness and well-being. So I think my audience might be slightly confused. Are you an agile coachy type person, or are you a psychology kindness person? But the common factor in all of it is flourishing and collaboration. So that's I guess the common theme.
Yes. Well, and a common theme, and it's done with fun and kindness, joy, right? Like there's that. I think we forget, those of us old enough to remember when Agile was new, but you forget that it really was all about breaking through the processes and the paperwork and the rules and the rigidity to get back to really working together. And then if we've had to try to roll out Agile and we try to make it work in large organizations and different teams and teams that are not intact anymore and teams that are, right? We've put a lot of process around Agile, and we tend to focus then on the process, right? Did you do your retrospective? Did you do your stand-ups? Did you have your, is your user stories the right way? All of those details, and we forget the essence of it. And I think that really is where your passion comes through is, yes, we want to do these processes because they do let us move faster and be more connected, but it's not the process alone. It is the approach. It is the openation. It is, as you put it, the collaboration.
Yeah.
That really makes the impact.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, so I see so much focus on the mechanics of the frameworks like Scrum and teams measuring themselves based on how many story points they're achieving rather than any value that they're delivering.
Yep.
And I've been involved in lots of agile transformations where everybody's been put through this kind of almost sheep dip training, train everybody in these mechanics, but they still don't have sight of things like where's the value, how do we actually know how to collaborate, how do we break down those silos and reduce those handovers. And so, yeah, for me, everything I've been doing in that space for the last, crikey, it's 25 years since Agile started. How can that be? Everything I've been doing there has been trying to get people to be smart, and think about the underlying principles about working on the most important thing, about avoiding misunderstandings, and those things come from working together and from breaking things down to something small and lean that is the most important thing. And the JIRA implementation seems to be where everybody starts. And you think, well,
Yeah.
you should really start at the top of your organization with a conversation about how to deliver value faster. Yes, so I have the exact same frustrations.
Yeah.
Which has led me into all of the specific work that I've been doing and the new things that I've come up with over the years.
It is funny how often we try to fix problems that are really human with processes, right? And so I think it's interesting because your work actually looks though both at that sort of collaboration, the teamwork, the human side, but it also does look at the process side of Agile and breaking it down. You have what I think is a very, very clever name for a framework, the OOPSI Framework, which is like oopsie. So talk to us a little bit about the sort of the origins of the OOPSI Framework and what that piece of it is meant to help support organizations with.
Yeah, so most of my experience in working with software development teams and Agile, and I did lead a large team towards the end of my kind of corporate job, but most of it was in focus of testing, test management, things like BDD, test-driven development, and all of those practices which reduce rework and get people properly collaborating together. So techniques like specification by example, BDD. My team were implementing all of those things when they were quite new, and we were seeing some real benefits of it. And I guess I was frustrated. I was really frustrated because a lot of my team during that transition, having moved from waterfall, you get all the benefits of working in collaborating and working on smaller chunks of stuff. But the team members didn't really know how to collaborate. So it was kind of like, okay, I know I need to have a conversation about this Post-it note thing, but what about my 25 years of deep analysis experience? Like, where does that go? And how do I capture the right amount of documentation? And when do I actually do the thinking? And all of these things kind of frustrated me. And so OOPSI came out of that. It also came from a lot of misuse of user stories, which I experienced on my own teams. And then when I was consulting in almost every team I worked with, where nobody really knew what a user story was. Was it a requirement? Because that's how it starts, as a user need. Or was it a specification? Because when you add acceptance criteria to it, it becomes something that's talking about the implementation. And is it an outcome, or is it to do with something that is generated, like a pay slip? Or is it a step in the process? Like, is it search for product, which is a step in the process? That's not an outcome. And so what I saw was this deep frustration, teams working with these little autonomous bits of functionality. They'd lost sight of the big picture, what they were working on. They didn't really know how important it was. They were using the user story parlance in a really sort of blind way. I call it template zombie. So on their own, they were writing, as a system engineer, I need a system to use the system. And you're just thinking, this is just crazy. Like, this is just completely crazy. So OOPSI stands for, there's so much to say about it. OOPSI stands for outcomes, outputs, process, scenarios, inputs. And it's a kind of way in. It's like sort of saying, start with the outcomes, make sure you know what's the most important, make sure you understand it, use some lovely, rich conversational techniques and storytelling to figure out what good looks like. Then the outputs are important because system thinking tells us that that's where the value in the system lies. So the things that actually end up in an expected result, or something that's been updated, or something in a user's hands rather than the navigation itself. So look for the outputs, understand the process because it's really valuable in aligning everybody. And when you narrow the outputs that you're looking at, the process gets simpler. And then for me, in all this world of testing and BDD, it led to a much more structured approach for all of those really good test-driven development and behavior-driven development frameworks. And the way that it works is that it helps you navigate complexity as you go. And so you can leave big chunks of unimportant stuff alone. It sort of merges the good stuff about good analysis practices and good testing practices with the nimbleness of Agile, so you can get started very quickly. Now, this I was talking about this in conferences and in the BDD community about 8 or 9 years ago, and I might have done 5 or 6 different talks. I wrote a blog on my old website, and then I kind of moved into different stuff, and it keeps coming back at me. So I'm still getting pingbacks about OOPSI. I've had a very famous product person, very famous, very, very well known, message me and say, your technique's being used by my client in the States, my big mortgage lender client. They want to speak to you. I found out that it was underpinning their whole test and development framework. A big consultancy, tech consultancy, I found out through a contact, had implemented OOPSI, but also evaluated a similar framework and chosen mine. And then recently, a really big tech company contacted me, and they've rolled it out. And I can't quite believe this, but his development manager said, this is the best thing of 2025. So that was very humbling. And so I'm writing a book. I need to get it out of me.
Yeah.
And into written form. So yeah, I know that was a long answer, but it's sort of complicated because it's like, I'm sort of stepping back into it now. Yeah. After all that time, but it's been lingering.
And you can see it's making an impact, right? It's live in the world, and that'll be fun when you write the book too, because it's not just a theory. I don't mean it that way, right? But you're seeing organizations of all size really use it. So let me just walk through the OOPSI. Let me reflect back and get some clarification on some parts. So we start with outcomes, which is really like in pragmatic language, it's what problem are we solving? It's what value we're delivering. So it's big. It is the goals. It's the reason we're here, right?
Yes.
Make it clear so we all know.
Yes.
At the end of the day, the product is only successful if these outcomes are delivered.
Yes. And astonishingly, lots of teams aren't really familiar with what those outcomes are, particularly at the higher level. And we know that teams who understand the context and understand the history and the landscape and the value and the benefits make better decisions. And you need that in order to have autonomous teams. So in product teams, ideally you want to give teams problems to solve, right? Rather that's a healthy product team is where they're given problems to solve rather than solutions to implement. And so I've done a lot of stuff about outcome-based planning outside of OOPSI. Questions like, what will have changed in the world when this is,
Mm-hmm.
what will be better, smarter, faster, easier? And really sort of trying to use all the techniques available to you to unpack that, journey mapping, interviews, prototyping, all of those things to make sure you've understood properly the problem first.
What I think it's nice is that it is aspirational sounding a little bit, right? But it's the whole reason we're in business, because it is the whole reason that there is differentiation, right? Like, this is where your product becomes something people need, want, will pay for, and love, right?
Yes.
So you've got to have clarity. But it's hard to, that is true, and you must have that close, but that it's far from that point to all the way down to, and so what are we going to work on tomorrow, right? So that's the next level then is output. So give me an example that walks us through, like, so we have outcomes, this is the problem we're solving, the value we deliver, and then the outputs are like, is it the reports that come from the system? Is it the activity that's supported? Tell me a little bit more.
Yeah, so the outputs are the things that you can touch and feel. So the expected result, if you were writing a test, or if you were doing behavior-driven development, it's the then, right? It's the final thing that comes out. And so, for example, and the other thing that is interesting to be aware of is that OOPSI can be used in the large, as a start to a big piece of work, or it can be used as with a user story to help you unpack it. It's the same, how you can always examine everything. You can keep examining it, right? So OOPSI works in that way. So imagine the problem that we were looking at was trying to make shopping easier for people through their mobile phones. And imagine we were building a new version of an online shopping app. And we'd focused on the outcomes. We already focused on the outcomes about what we want to achieve in terms of, a better user experience, more seamless in terms of receiving your groceries or whatever it is. You've already worked on the outcome. You're looking for the outputs, and you're thinking, okay, what is it that the user's actually getting? Well, they're getting their shopping, right? They're getting their receipt. They're getting a confirmed order. They're getting a display of search results. And so it's everything that it takes. It's like outcome-based language at first. It takes a while to get good at it. So the outputs is the thing that you can sketch. It could be, if you were talking about a banking application, an output would be an updated bank balance.
Okay.
So it's not to do with the way that it gets updated. It's to do with the final thing.
The thing that needs to be delivered.
Yeah. So in
order to create the outcome.
Exactly. So in a payroll system, imagine a big ERP rollout, a payroll system. A pay slip's a pretty important output, right?
Yes.
As well as
we're all big fans of the pay slip.
Yeah. as well as the updated bank balance in the employee's bank account.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if you were looking at your massive ERP project and you took a step back and you said, okay, what are the outputs? You'd have pay slips, you'd have P60s, you'd have this. I'm talking about UK here. You'd have different tax documents, you'd have updated balances, and it's like the Pareto principle applies. 20% of those outputs will be responsible for 80% of the value. So with the outputs is such an important stage of OOPSI, because you can say, okay, there's all these outputs. Let's start with a pay slip and an updated bank balance. Let's just start with that, because we know that's utterly critical for our payroll system. But not just that. Let's start with this pay slip. This pay slip for a UK person who pays national insurance, who doesn't have a student loan, who doesn't have a pension, who's been working for the company for over a year, the simplest one. Exactly that. And then you define it and you illustrate it and make it concrete. So that's what you're going to then build as your first, not to necessarily put live, because of course that's not enough, but to bring forward all the learning that happens when you get started, with confidence that what you're working on is the very most important thing. And so it aligns everybody. In that session, brainstorming outputs, you'd have engineers, UI folks, architects, because that informs the data model. And just talking about those, what you'd come out with would be an illustrated payslip with the best example of real world data that you could jointly come up with. And then you move to the next step.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. And then the next step is process. And I don't think you mean like internal processes. So what do we mean on process?
I mean the steps involved by the system to generate the output.
Okay. But it's a system view, not a user view.
Yeah. I mean, it's, through process mapping, you can often look at it two ways. You can decide whether it's the user language that you're using or the system. But the events, essentially, you're looking at what it's mapping down to is the different events, the different distinct events that will become part of the design. So in our in our payroll example, it would be that there was some data arranged, that the payroll process was executed specifically for that output. So if you were trying to put together an analysis document, process mapping document that tried to describe the payroll process, you'd have one of those things from pre-Agile, which with all the decision trees, I used to have
to a lot of trees. Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I used to have to print out like 9 sheets of paper and sellotape them together. Yeah. What happens when you've defined an output like I just described is that you've taken away all the decisions and you've made them linear. So the decision tree doesn't say, is this person a UK resident? It's just like, yes. Do they have a pension? No. And so what you get is a very linear process, because at the P stage of OOPSI, you're going to capture the process, the activity steps. So if you were doing use case modeling, this would be like the activities in terms of an interaction process flow, but it's linear because there's one very specific output coming out of the end. And you'd illustrate that, you'd collaborate about it, you'd go, did we get that right? And you might, with the shopping app, for example, if you've chosen to, your first thing you're going to do, you're just going to generate a completed order. That's your output. And maybe you've got another output that you're also going to generate as part of your process, which is a basket which has been added to. And you'd illustrate both those things, exactly what the basket contains, exactly what the completed confirmation looks like with the items in the basket, the value, your shopping slot, all of that. And then you'd capture the steps, the leanest steps that you can build to generate exactly that.
And I think one of the advantages to the op part of OOPSI, right? The output and the process is that you really narrow it in to start, right? Yeah. Because we all know, like, well, what if we always did the classic, what if the cat walks across the keyboard? Well, That's not likely unless I work in a vet shop. Like, you can get down into the what ifs, what happens, what cans, making it really tight and focusing on one to start with builds the muscle, builds the agreement, builds the view, and then everything off becomes, you already have a path to success. Yes. And you can add the other flavors in because you've already aligned around so many things in a much clearer, simpler view. And I think too often we're in a rush to include everything.
Yeah.
That this is a really nice, like, and by getting this tight, you always have someone's listening going, I don't have time for that, Rebecca. I have to deliver more. But truly getting it tight on the small piece, I imagine it really speeds the long-term piece because you figured so much stuff out.
Exactly. I'm so glad you're getting this. I'm so glad everybody gets it. Yeah, exactly. And so it brings forward all the, oh, right, we didn't think of that. This fundamental part of our API doesn't even exist over here. It brings all that learning together early, but also it solves that analysis paralysis problem. So Agile was supposed to get rid of that, right? Agile was supposed to help us start small. But what I see is teams brainstorming 2,000 user stories up front. And then they get written individually as a into Jira, and then they just sit there and fester.
Yeah.
And nobody cares about 90% of what's in there, which is a waste.
Yeah.
It's a massive waste. And so what this allows you to do is defer thinking. You're going to come back round to it if it's important. You're going to revisit it. You choose a different, in your second iteration, you're going to add some new outputs into the mix, make the story more complete. But yeah, it does exactly that. It gives you a way of getting started. Lots of teams don't know how to get started. It gives you a way of getting started. It aligns everybody to something really, really concrete. And then everything that you're capturing in terms of the output itself and how you need to arrange the test data to get that scenario to work, that's all living documentation, and it helps as this beautiful ubiquitous language which the development team understand, and the UI team understand, and the customer understands. So yeah, it helps with that shared understanding and translation as well.
And I imagine sometimes it's hard to pinpoint the issue when all the noise is there. But again, when we start small, it's easier to see.
Yeah.
So then if we go to the S, scenarios, which my understanding from reading about it is sort of the acceptance criteria.
Mm-hmm.
What format does that come? Is it standard sort of like it shall and here's the 5 bullets? Or like what is a good scenario structure?
So I guess the format, I don't want to be prescriptive in terms of the different practices that teams use to write their scenarios. The fundamental principle is that defer capturing scenarios and acceptance criteria until you have the process, because it helps massively in terms of rationalizing the scenarios. So what I see, and having had lots of experience in testing and test management, is if you start too early with the what ifs, the scenarios, the one where this, you end up again with this huge sprawling set, which if you're using behavior-driven development tools or automation, becomes totally overwhelming and means that you just can't see what you're doing. So what the S does, once you've got your steps in the process, so imagine you've got your shopping app process and you're saying, okay, search for product, add to basket, confirm order, checkout. Imagine that you've got your different steps as the P in OOPSI to support your outputs that you're doing. Your scenarios then are only going to focus on one of those boxes. And that's going to structure how you organize your tests. So you might have a box there which is, search, product search. Yeah. And in OOPSI, that's the thing that looks the closest to a user story in terms of how most teams start working on one. Yeah, so we already know that good practice in user story splitting might be to split by outputs or to split by process steps. So OOPSI is sort of helping you with that user story splitting. So it means that any scenarios you think of, so in search product, your scenarios might be, what if there's too many search results? What if there's a symbol? What if there's rosé wine and a rose? You might be, so those are your scenarios sitting under search for product, but because you're now just attaching them, OOPSI is helping you organize your scenarios, and that scenario is just attached to that step in the process. And so if you had a living documentation system, Confluence or SharePoint or something like that, you could have a folder there that says search product, and you could start to organize scenarios underneath that. And for me, having had a lot of experience in testing, where you start to describe scenarios and exactly what's going in and exactly what's coming out, that's very, very concrete specifications of how the system's working. You want to keep that. You don't want to throw it away. And so another frustration with Jira, it's not a document storage system. It's a tracking tool. And so as your user story gets split up and ends up as something that is a task, you're trying to figure out how it's supposed to work. You might have 300 conversations to navigate in Jira. Yeah, so I know I'm answering a lot there, but so the scenarios hang off the process steps, basically, and then that might look like acceptance criteria as part of a user story, and the user story might be search product, or it might be that you don't use user stories. It might be that you use BDD given, when, then, and the scenario is the given, when, then that's attached to the actual process step. And if you find a scenario that doesn't have a process step, doesn't have a home, you've missed a process step.
Interesting. A nice little, And also, I mean, again, I think that the focus is what keeps us on track again, right? Tightening up where we're focused. Yeah. All right. So the I, not only does it go from oops to oopsie, which is much more positive, but let's talk about inputs, right? Because I think for a lot of people, it's like, okay, and then we have our acceptance criteria and we're good. But no, there's another step. So let's talk about inputs.
Yeah. So inputs, it also stands for, it also is about the arrangement of data. So the preconditions. So it's the inputs and the preconditions. So this comes from all of my experience in testing and all the great practices like specification by example by Goiko Adzik, which is about illustrating tests with real world data. So where misunderstandings, in my experience, where most misunderstandings and rework comes from is assumptions made around the data that's needed to drive a test. And so it's like bringing the test forward. So when I'm talking about input data and preconditions, I've got my scenario search product. I've got my process step search product. I've got my scenario check for special character. That's my scenario. My inputs and preconditions is going to be a little table or a couple of tables that says, here's what's arranged in the product table. I've got rosé wine. I've got a rose. I've got white wine. I've got red wine. There's the different categories. This is exactly how the structure of those categories look. So, the preconditions of the table, that's the given, in given, when, then. Given, there's a really small product catalogue table, just big enough to run this scenario, looks like this. When I search for exactly this, rosé wine without an acute or with an acute, and then you're defining the fewest number of specific test examples that you need to verify the implementation rules. And so in behavior-driven development, the whole point of that is that you're bringing that thinking forward and you're talking about it. And you're making decisions about how you're going to implement. They're like, will we allow rosé wine without an acute? No. or yes. And the test data with the expected result, if I put in rose without an acute, I get rosé wine. So yeah, it verifies the implementation. So in the waterfall days, that would be a test condition. So the tester would look at the use case design, they'd look at the ambiguous, abstracted rules, go, I don't know what that means, and they'd put together some test conditions that would happen at the end of the development that they'd run, and it would fail. And so this brings that forward, and it becomes part of the implementation detail. So your scenario would be supported by the specific data that you need to drive the test, the arrangement of data in the preconditions, and the input data that you'd use to drive the test, which is where the I comes from, and then exactly what you expect, the expected result, which, guess what, looks exactly like the output that you've chosen earlier.
Well, and what you've done here is you bring it forward, right? You bring this thinking forward so that there is, in fact, less oopsies and less rework, right? Right? Because we're thinking all that process through from the beginning, and we're elevating some of that thinking, which I think is super smart.
Yeah. And that's when I started working on OOPSI, it was having seen the benefits of doing that in an agile team, to bringing that thinking forward, using those practices, but they were just disjointed as part of the agile framework.
So we've got a lot of product managers listening who are like, this makes sense. I can see how all of this is still then tied. It brings some of the gotchas or oopsies that we get at the end forward to eliminate that, but it still keeps everybody really, really grounded on the outcomes. But they're also thinking, how do I, one lone product manager, start to implement this, right?
Yeah.
The whole process. But if we're talking to people listening, how would you have them start, right? What are some things they could do now to start with this thinking?
Yeah. And so I always think that with anything like this, the best way is through stealth, right? Rather than some announcement like, we're implementing OOPSI. It's much better to be a bit stealthy. And I'd say the easiest place to start is just to make it part of a conversation. So, as product folks, you often take the pen, don't you? You often take the pen. You're in a situation where you're trying to unpack something. You're trying to elicit the needs and the details. And so taking the pen and saying, okay, let's talk about the outcomes, and then let's have another session. Let's talk about what are the important outputs here? How would you give me an example of that? What would a really good example of that look like? Could we illustrate that just to help us understand what you've said? And, and does this look like what you'd want? Should we start with that? So just as a conversation tool is a good way to start. So that's one aspect. Other folks who've got started with it quickly use it as part of like a Three Amigos discussion when they're working on stories. So they might have other processes to help them get to the part where they're looking at a user story. And at that point, with a technical expert, a business expert, and a quality expert, that could be a product person, it could be a business analyst, they'll get together and talk about this story and say, okay, do we understand the outputs? What's the process? And use that at the sharper end to help smooth the implementation. So it's like you can kind of start either way. And it depends. So I'm in the middle of writing the book, and it depends on the situation you're in. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Cynefin framework, which helps you. The Cynefin framework helps you understand complexity, the known knowns, the unknown knowns, And so if you're working with a lot of complexity and uncertainty, the navigation of OOPSI, where you're doing that, can we get to that leanest slice, is really useful in helping you to get to an experiment. If you're working on something which is more mature and less uncertainty, and you really just need that analysis, you already get it, but you just need the experts, you need to just do the analysis, then the collaborative aspects of OOPSI, getting everybody together to talk about the different steps and make sure you've captured them and understand them, is a really good place to start. So yeah, I've just written that chapter.
Excellent. Well, if people listening want to sort of follow along, with your thinking, know when the book comes out, where should we send them?
So I have done a landing page for OOPSI Insider signups, which I can give you to share. Yeah, to
please,
put in when you put it out. It's a landing page. So that's going to be kind of keeping people informed of how I'm doing with the book. On my LinkedIn page, I've been doing some tasters of the book content, but also the behind the scenes process of writing the book. So I've been writing the book in the open. My friend Kerry is writing a book too. And so we've been interviewing each other on recorded calls. Yeah, we've been interviewing each other. We've been doing it for about 4 or 5 months, every few weeks. And then we've been getting it all out and then seeing what did I say? And then making sense of that. So there's also a lot of that content on my LinkedIn of the journey itself. And then, yes, there's the article that's a couple of years old now that I shared with you earlier, which I can also share.
Yeah, we'll drop that in the notes. So, all right, Jenny, this was great. Thank you so much for coming back on and for talking us through the OOPSI. I'm excited when the book comes out to kind of dive in more. Maybe we can do a series then on each right?
That sounds great. And you know what? I love that you've called the thing the oopsies, right? The oopsies that come out if you don't. And I love that. I've not thought of that. So, I have to see how I can work that in.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. That does it for today's episode. Don't forget to join us next week when we tackle another great topic designed to help you elevate your product, your company, and your career.